So what's up, trade crew? Welcome back to HVAC R&D, hosted by Rhydon Atzenhoffer. Tonight, I have got someone that is doing everything they can to truly help rebuild and fix the trades gap in this country. So without further ado, let's get it, y'all. From the beginning of this show, I've always said that the trades industry is built on great people with great stories, and I want the trade crew to hear yours. Whether you're in the field turning a wrench or running duct, building a trades empire from your office, working the distribution counter, grinding a sales territory, repping or working for a manufacturer, or anywhere in between, HVAC R&D is the show about the power of conversation, collaboration over competition, and sharing real conversations from every corner of the trades community. And if you've got a story to tell, then I've got a microphone ready for you. So when you're ready, go check out the links to the HVAC R&D Podcast Questionnaire that are on all social media channels and on the website, and get in touch with me about joining an episode of the show. If this is your first time listening, thank you so much for sharing some time with me. If you're coming back show after show, thank you for helping me continue to make this dream of highlighting our trades a reality. Please make sure to smash the like and subscribe buttons on any and all streaming and social platforms where you follow the show, and please share with your friends and trade crew. If you aren't following the show, you can find me on Instagram and TikTok at hvac.rnd, and on LinkedIn, Facebook, and TradeHounds as the HVAC R&D Podcast. Please make sure to go check out hvacrnd.com and visit the swag shop for some cool merch and some Cajun Joe's Bayou Spice, and then check out the vendor hub for discounts on BetterHelp, Chirp, Service Titan, and my newest partner, SkillCat. So trade crew, this evening I've got a great one for you. I am joined by Mark Hedstrom, Executive Director of the Skilled Careers Coalition, a group working to close the skilled labor gap and bring more young people into the trades. We're going to talk about the Gen Z toolbelt generation, the silver tsunami of retiring tradespeople, and how mentorships and programs like Skills Jam are shaping the future of recruitment and supporting for the skilled trades. So Mark, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on.
Yes, I'm very excited. Thank you so much for doing this. What you're doing is amazing right now. So I'm very excited to get your take on how we can continue to bring more people into the trades.
Yeah, look forward to it. And thanks, again for getting us involved and giving us a chance to talk about what we're doing and what we're looking at in the skilled career space.
Well, and looking through your career, you went through a lot of different industries. You started at a place called Movember, and then you went to Oakley, which everybody knows who Oakley is, and now you're with the Skilled Careers Coalition. So what really inspired your transition to get into the skilled trade space?
Yeah, it's a good question. My origin story and my background is, I'm a product of a 4-year degree and graduate level work. But I started out when I was younger. I grew up in central Massachusetts and worked on a farm. So I worked on a farm for 8 summers when I was in high school all the way through college. And, I think my parents' point was you're going to learn what manual labor looks like and how it feels. And, if that's something you want to explore, then that's a path you can go down. I chose a different path, but, the reality was I think it was more grounding in what it was like to work with the hands, what it was like to, do hard work, but work that was meaningful, and what it was like to take home a paycheck. I think that was the educational points they were trying to deliver. For a period of time, I was in the healthcare sector. So I spent about 10 years in healthcare, really helping hospitals and health systems manage and treat patients, regardless of how the patient was showing up and where they were showing up in the hospital. But what I found in that is, a lot of that was around best practice process and research around, what are the best ways to approach a problem and how do you actually solve large scale issues like delivering healthcare in America. As you mentioned, I took a quick jump. I was actually the CFO and the COO of a snowboard and skateboard company. So I was cool for a minute. And then I went to Oakley, so it was a little bit cooler for a couple more minutes, but spent about 5 years in that space. And largely it just came about of, and I'm sure some of your listeners are in this space as well. I had spent a good 10 years in the healthcare system talking about how and helping people run a business, but I never run one myself. So
Gotcha.
I came in as the CFO and COO of a snowboard and skateboard company, largely because I'd never had that experience and I wanted to actually get my hands dirty on how does it and what does it take to run a business. And then just made a completely different leap into philanthropy. So I ran the Movember Foundation for 12 years here in the U.S. So for those partners that have had to witness a terrible mustache every November, I apologize. For those that grew a mustache and raised money for men's health, I want to thank you, and obviously all those partners that supported that effort. But I think in those three areas and arenas, right? So healthcare, manufacturing, or action sports, and then philanthropy around men's health. The reason I was attracted to staying in philanthropy, but also what was happening within the skilled careers or skilled trades, is it has a lot of the underpinning same challenges and problems that can be solved for if you apply some of the same principles that I've learned sort of over a long career at this point. And there's some interesting things that I'm sure we'll get into today about what similarities I see and what's happening in skilled careers and rebuilding the skilled workforce in America. How do we start hearing that again? How do we destigmatize it? All the way through to how do we make sure that there's fulfillment for young students that are coming out into an HVAC trade, or they're going into construction or manufacturing and feeling like they have a lifetime of value in the job and they have a passion for what they do.
Comparatively, I kind of had the same type of upbringing. My father ran his own HVAC business, and if I wanted an allowance, it was called a paycheck. So I had to go to work. I didn't really have much of a choice. But, by the time I got to college level, I was tired of attics and crawl spaces. I thought I would go and try to figure out how to do something different. Now, I still worked my way through college thanks to this trade. If it weren't for this trade, I wouldn't have anything in this life, to be honest. So the trades have been very good to me. But I continue to be an advocate, just like you, to find a way to help people, build businesses better. A lot of the reasons I ended up doing entrepreneurial business in college, I actually started as a history major, which I know you did as well, which we can talk about that at some point too. But I got into entrepreneurial business because, I watched my dad build a business, but I also watched him make a lot of mistakes that I didn't understand how to help him fix.
Mm-hmm.
So I really wanted to understand how to build a business from A to B to C to Z and all the way to the end, so that either I stayed in the family business and I helped build there, or I ended up eventually in distribution, mainly because of things that were economically happening in 2008, 9, and 10. And I got into distribution, but one of the things that I wanted to be was I wanted to be the sales rep that my dad and I didn't have. So I wanted to be able to bring a different kind of value to a contractor's business, where if he needed help or he needed someone to pitch things off of or talk back and forth with, I could do that with him just as well as help him get a price on a 3-ton changeout he was doing the next day. So I completely understand kind of where you're coming from and taking all the different things that you've used throughout your career to kind of apply them to help solve another problem.
Mm-hmm. Exactly right.
We'll say is, where we grew up. I know you grew up outside of Boston, but now you've lived in Los Angeles for a long period of time. So just because I'm an avid sports fan, I'm also a huge Red Sox fan. I have to ask, are you still a Red Sox Celtics guy, or have you become a Dodgers Lakers guy?
Oh, no, I'm a diehard Red Sox Celtics.
Okay.
Yeah, you don't leave that. You don't leave that space if you ever want to be, talked to by your family members who are still living in New England. It's kind of funny because my son is born here. I have an 11-year-old son, but he's born and raised Angelino, which, most people in Los Angeles aren't from Los Angeles. Is, a few that have been here for generations, but he proudly wears the Celtics jersey from last year when they won the championship all throughout town. So.
Nice.
I think I'm raising him right in that respect. And, a lot of my friends are Lakers fans. So, but the thing about, so there's definitely that rivalry, right? So you can't change colors in that one. I think the only thing with the Red Sox Dodgers, the Kings aren't really a team, although they're playing a lot better than the Bruins.
That's true.
Right now.
That's true.
Hockey's a weird sport in LA, but Kings have had some great success. Don't want to make anyone upset who might be a Kings fan.
Well, that's because Gretzky's not there anymore.
Yeah.
We're waiting for the next great one.
That's right. But when it comes to Red Sox Dodgers, you have taken them to Dodgers games because it's hard to get to a Red Sox game, obviously. And it's a National League team, so you can kind of cheer for them up to a point, and there's not that same level of rivalry. I mean, there's certainly between the cities, but not between those two teams. So, and for a period of time, where the Dodgers kind of stood themselves back up. They were basically what we called Red Sox Nation West, because Garciaparra was there. All the guys that helped win series in Boston came to LA when they were getting to the end of the career. So it was good to have a little bit of Red Sox Nation on the West Coast.
Which where I grew up, most everybody else are huge Braves fans, which I love the Braves. They're my National League team. The Red Sox are my American League team. So getting to see Mookie Betts and Freddie Freeman on the Dodgers, I can give you a little bit. Yeah. I still think Freddie Freeman's home run this past World Series was one of the coolest things to get to witness and kind of hear the story and stuff behind it. So,
yeah. So I mean, we trade. I mean, I have had dogs named David Ortiz, and currently have a dog named LeBron James because my wife's from Cleveland. So. So we had a couple of those things going on in the house. So, we're trying to raise him right and make sure he doesn't just sort of flip loyalties because some team's winning.
Oh, that's funny. Now, do you still call – now, if the dog ever gets in trouble, does he get called Big Papi then, or is that only when he's being good?
No, anytime. Yeah, anytime we can say it on the street in particular, because people find it somewhat hilarious, because he's kind of built funny. Like David Ortiz was built. Just a big dude. And, it's just, it just turned out that way. I mean, there's a whole origin story behind that I won't bore your listeners with, but,
we love a good story on this show. What are you talking about?
Yeah. Well, it came out of the short answer is my wife wanted a second dog. We had a dog that we moved from DC with to Los Angeles, and it was the 2004 ALCS. Sox are down 3-0 to the Yankees. Really getting pushed to get a second dog. And I said, fine, because I knew what this was going to eventuate, because I knew the Red Sox history, 86 years at that point. I said, fine, if the Red Sox win this series, we can get a dog. And I said, if they win the World Series, then I get to name the dog. I knew it was a sure bet for me that that wasn't going to happen. And I was proven wrong. So we ended up with the dog named David Ortiz.
I remember watching the entire 2004 comeback on a 13-inch TV screen that I just sitting on the edge of the bed as close to the TV as I could see it so that I could actually see everything that was going on. And then they go to the World Series, they reverse the curse, and it's finally we got to see them win again. And then 3 years later in 2007, when they go back to the World Series again and they're playing out in Colorado, my brother-in-law, God rest his soul, is a massive Yankees fan. Mm-hmm. And one of the greatest things that he ever did to poke fun at me was he bought a ticket for him and my sister to go to Coors Field, and then he mailed me a Red Sox program from Colorado just to say he went to the Red Sox World Series and not me.
Oh, that's a good burn.
If that's not like the greatest burn in family sports competitive history, I don't know what is.
Yeah, that's pretty good. That's pretty good.
So I know family is important to you. Obviously, your work and your career and things you've done a lot of different things. And, how have you been able to really balance all that together over the years? And I can tell you've done a great job of it, because some of us struggle with it. But, what's helped you be able to do all of those things?
Well, I think it's probably just time and perspective. I think I'm much better at it than I was in my 30s. In terms of, managing that work life, those first 10 years in healthcare, I think I saw my wife when she was still my fiance, and we were just starting to date, maybe, I don't know, once or twice a month, because I was on planes a lot. So I used to travel about 40 weeks a year. And I just, honestly, just that experience, while great, because I got to see a lot of, North America, as we were talking about, I've been to a lot of parts of places like North Carolina and Minnesota and places in between. But the reality was, it was a good learning point to say, okay, if this is what working is like, I'm not sure this is what I want to do. So I think just over time and with perspective, I've kind of moved to, like, how do you create that right balance? One of the interesting things, I think, or silver linings for white collar workforce, in particular, coming out of COVID, was that move to hybrid work. And, I was a benefactor of that, because, beneficiary of that, simply because, it allowed me to be home more often. Obviously, everything else that happened with COVID was pretty negative. But one of the things that allowed me to do is to kind of really start embracing, being more present in my son's life, realizing he was getting a bit older, that I wanted to be around, much like my dad was, and my mom, and, starting to slow down and focusing more on family. So I think there's been some, just time constraints and perspectives along the way that have helped me kind of recenter myself on what's important.
I think COVID did that to a lot of us. I kind of had a very similar thing. I was still at home every night, in an outside sales job, but I was always on the road and I was always home late.
That's right.
And, going from being out on the road as much to a lot of times either being just, I was in the office all day and I actually got home at 4:30 or 5, or I was working from home. So I know that kind of changed and gave new perspective, to me. And I think it did to a whole lot of other people that are in kind of the support side of the trades.
Yeah. It gets you to focus on what matters. Right. And look,
Yeah.
I think it just acknowledged that, my career has allowed me that privilege to have a bit more time. And I have a role and a job that is a bit more time bound by being in an office versus being on a manufacturing floor. So I think, it's just leveraging and I think thinking about how you're spending your time and making sure that you ultimately try to get that balance right. And that's not easy for a lot of people. I also recognize that, a lot of people work in two jobs, and it's hard and you're tired when you come home. So how do you find that way or space, for your family and making sure that you're there for your partner and your kids?
No, it's definitely true. And, as we talk about finding time for family, finding time for work, and starting to look and take different perspectives on things, I think a lot of that, as you stated, is kind of what helped lead you towards finding a way to help provide solutions for the skilled labor gap. So, how did you truly just decide to, or start with SCC, and then as you continue to do big things to close that gap, what did you see as the biggest roadblock to getting more young people in the trades as you took on this new role with them? Since 1961, JP Lamborn Company has been the name behind some of the best flexible duct products in the business. A third-generation family-owned company that built its legacy on integrity, innovation, and service. That same spirit drives them today, with antimicrobial technology, top-tier materials, and a relentless focus on quality. When contractors need a product they can stand behind, JPL delivers. It's more than just flex duct, it's peace of mind. JPL, the name you know, the quality you trust, and the flex that delivers.
Yeah, so like we talked about at the beginning, from my time in November and previous lives, like this is a lot about systems change. It's about process. It's about finding best practices. People are doing really great stuff, smart stuff, and then sharing that as widely as you can. So this is, an acknowledgement that the Skilled Careers Coalition is a catalyzer or a convener, right? We're here to add value. We're here to find those places that we can amplify and hero other people's work. We're not meant to be, overlapping or anything other than complementary. And so when I look at, what I did in previous lives, particularly within November, and then this, the challenge with what we were trying to do at November with men's health in particular, and then mental health and suicide prevention, is that it's a generational thing that has been there for a long period of time. Men have had challenges with their mental health, and obviously it's now coming into the conversation on a national scale. The same issue here is that the messaging to young individuals and their parents for over a generation, I would argue even closer to 40 years, is that a 4-year degree was one option, or going into the military was the other option. There wasn't a big conversation, unless your dad or your mom was in a skilled trade of, or they owned a business, of going into, a skilled career, right? It was always considered the blue collar job, and it was often described as dark, dirty, and dangerous. And so when I look at what we were doing in men's mental health, and when I look at skilled trades, those blue collar jobs, there's a stigma that's attached to them, right? They're low paying jobs, they're dirty jobs. And I just think that has massively changed. And I think we're doing a huge disservice to young students who might be really good in a skilled career and might have an aptitude for it and might be an amazing coworker or amazing entrepreneur. So how do we start heroing? How do we destigmatize and then start heroing what a skilled career can look like? Because there's amazing, as you know, there's some amazing opportunities out there for young individuals who are coming into their careers, and we want to make a skilled career as equal to, if not on par with, going a 4-year degree or going into the military. We think that's important.
Well, and I think, yes, this is probably a terrible pun to use for that, but you kind of hit the nail on the head with that one, because I saw the same thing even 15, 20 years ago when I was going to go into school. It was either you're going to get a 4-year degree or you should go in the military. Even then, it wasn't, I'm just going to go work full time with dad and help build his business, because my mom came from an education background. A 4-year degree she thought was very important. My dad didn't have a degree, so he worked very hard to make sure that I could get one, because it was something he didn't have and he wanted me to have. Because when he was raised, my dad was much older, and he was raised that either you're doing this hard work job, or if you get a 4-year degree, you're set for life.
Correct.
And even when I came out of school, that was really starting to change a lot of the ways anyway. And really now we see what we talk about as the Gen Z toolbelt generation, which is a term that you guys use, which is great because we're seeing more people start to think about it, but it's still a massive growing gap because of how many people are retiring and the quote unquote great skills transfer. So, can you explain why that is and what that is, and why mentorships and apprentices really are going to be crucial to help this next group of young people pursue skilled careers and opportunities?
Yeah, and I'll look to try to keep it simple, because there's a lot of data behind it and a lot of thinking that we and others have put to this issue. But when we talk about the Skilled Careers Coalition and emphasizing a couple of words in there, careers is different than trades, because we're trying to elevate this as something that is a lifelong pathway for people, right? And language is important in these conversations.
Yes.
I would say the same about my work in men's mental health. Language is incredibly important. And so we want to be elevating it from trades and what people think about, particularly, our parents' generations and what they think about a trade job versus a skilled career or a white collar job or a 4-year degree job. That's number one. So that career is important. Coalition is the second most important word in that conversation, because what we're trying to do is bring different industries together. So we may be having conversations about what's happening in HVAC and home building or other parts of what traditional trades are thought as versus what's happening across different sectors. So if you look at automotive, if you look at aeronautics, if you look at manufacturing and other parts and spaces, you look at industrial trades, there's a massive challenge across the board. So when we talk about the Skilled Careers Coalition, we start with career because we want to elevate the opportunity and show that it's on par with those other choices in someone's life. And then a coalition, which is how do we bring people together? I think those two things are grounding in what we're doing. And the reason we're so hyper-focused on language and how we talk about these things is you're in a space where you're trying to rebuild an option in a workforce that's largely been told, since their parents' generation, that a 4-year degree is the best option for them. To your point, and what you just said is, by the time you're coming out of school, the reality is a 4-year degree is no longer of high value if it's not in a STEM.
Correct. That college career pipeline is great and it's been around forever, but It's not what we need in terms of helping people understand there is a different option. So there's that massive gap in education in our recruitment system.
That's correct. So we've been having this conversation with generations, and particularly parents and students over generations, saying 4-year degree is the way to go, and that's how you get ahead in America. The reality is, when you start looking at it now, that ROI isn't there. And you take a couple of data points that I'm happy to share with you and your audience. One is, if you look at actually 4-year degrees, the dropout rate for 4-year degrees is about 40% in the US. So almost 1 out of every 2 students who enters college drops out. That's a big number. And so where do those people go, right? they end up in service sector jobs. They don't end up in being reskilled to do a skilled, career or skilled trade job. And then not only are they dropping out, they're dropping out with debt. And so now they've got this, in their minds, if they're dropping out of a 4-year degree, they might think of themselves as a failure. And they've also got the economic impact of having debt that they have to pay back. So we've got to be doing something different about this, right? We've got to be talking to younger students when they're younger in middle school as best we can through social media. And we can have a long conversation about social media and the pros and cons. But we have to be talking to younger students and their parents and their advisors about this is an option to be considering. This is an option on equal weight to the other two. We need to allow students to explore a skilled career alongside going to college or going into the military. And that's critically important because we need to start that young to kind of get them on the pathway and get them out the door. And even for those students that drop out of college, right, within 2 years, you can be in a skilled career. You can be in a trade that is helping you pay off that debt you assumed and also putting you into a career that you might love. So there's opportunity across the board, and it's a quicker pathway for a lot of individuals.
Well, like you said, it's truly about there's a massive stigma attached to it. And what we have to do now is we have to find the different ways that we shift the perception of those skilled careers to parents, to educators, to young people before they get to a place where they think they're out of options, as opposed to seeing it before so that they can really know what the options are.
Correct.
And a lot of it is what can businesses and industry leaders do to really help move that needle. I think there needs to be a cleaner path for people, even in distribution like myself. I've worked really hard to be able to be involved with programs that allow me to go into schools and do different things to try to help promote workforce development and other things. But there needs to be an easier way for businesses to do that.
Yeah, I think there are examples of, and I think there are businesses that have either recognized or are recognizing the need to be more engaged in that. Let's just call it what it is, an ecosystem, right? So you have. So in our world, when we talk about the Skilled Careers Coalition, there's 3 things that we focus on. One is Inspire. So our whole Skills Jam platform on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube is all around those that are in the trades today, those that are in a skilled career, a young adult, a student, talking about why they're passionate about what they do. So whether it's an HVAC repairman or woman, or it's a construction worker, or it's someone who's working in mechatronics, which is, automation. Having them inspire others around them that are their age or close to their age about what's possible with a skilled career, and like just getting them to lean into it and understand that there's optionality for them. Like there are things they can look at, and having another student or someone that's closer to their age talk to them about why they're passionate about that job. So that's what we do in Inspire with Skills Jam. The middle piece that you're talking about here is where employers or where business comes into play, is that ecosystem, right? So there's all these intermediaries, workforce development boards, local CTE schools and educators, through to, what's happening in the state and federal level with respect to career technical education funding and, support. And that's where it kind of starts to break down. As you talk to a lot of employers, some of them are doing a great job because they realized, hey, we've got a workforce that's in our backyard that's going to a technical school. We need to be in there at that school, providing them opportunity on the floor of what we're actually building down the street, so they have an experience and understanding of what they could do. And we've got a potential employee 2 years down the road. So when you talk about workforce developments, it literally comes down to, being hyper local in some cases, and, looking in your backyard as to, what kind of technical education is available. If there isn't something that speaks to, the business that you run or the type of organization you have, like how do you invest in providing that type of technical education in your backyard, right? So the ecosystem, I think, works well, but it's got a ton of friction. So we're not losing tons of people out the side and ending up in non-trade jobs. But the real challenge in that sort of connect ecosystem, as we call it, is just making sure there's better cohesion between a student who's looking for a job, the parent who's supporting that or the advisor that's supporting that student's decision and actually getting into CTE programming and then finding that employer in their backyard or starting their own business. Those are the two challenges when we look at this: inspire, connect, and then convert. We really focus on inspire and connect.
And as we kind of get into those things, let's go ahead and we'll move into Skills Jam and what it is and how it is doing, your work of inspiring, engaging, and connecting young people in the trades. What's up, trade crew? You've heard the buzz. You've seen the press gang at every single AHR. Contractors across the country are ditching their torches for RLS press fittings, and they're not looking back. Why? Because RLS lets you finish faster, safer, and cleaner. From rooftops to mechanical rooms, crawl spaces, and attics, it's a press-and-go solution that's leak-tested, UL recognized, and proudly made in America. Make the switch to RLS and take the heat out of your installs, literally. RLS, rapid locking system, press forward and press on.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that, and this came out of, as we talked about early on, this came out of my work at Movember and how do we engage men, right? How do we engage men in conversation about their health? And particularly one of the programs that we ran, and it's actually running right now in April around testicular cancer, is really talking to young men about the risks that they face and what they can do about how do they, do a self-check and take more of a proactive approach in their own health. And my learning from that over 12 years and applying that to Skills Jam, what we're trying to do here is there's an inspiration piece. I think, there's pros and cons to social media. I think social media can be leveraged for good. We're trying to live in the good space, using language that's positive, talking about passion points, talking about, a fulfilling lifetime ahead with a career that you might choose. And then having students who are in that space actually talk about it and show it in reality. And a lot of that, and that's why we call it Inspire, is that positive language about, pursuing your passion. And while that may seem kind of hokey, the reality is I think a lot of people, when they step back and look at, what do I want to do with my life, particularly young students, they want to understand and be involved in something that gives them joy or makes them passionate about waking up every morning and going to work. That's not always the case, but that's, I think, what most people look to have in their career. And so we spend a lot of time in that space thinking about how do we deliver that message. But it's not just showing them what's possible. It's actually steering and guiding them down that journey, right? So let's say they want to be in HVAC repair or installation. Like, what does that actually look like in reality? So students who are in school for that, but also people are out in industry and in that space actually doing the work and showing what that work looks like. Because we want to provide that clear pathway and say, hey, how do we take 30 years of a career and show a young student what's possible in a very short period of time so they can kind of understand where this could lead to. And a lot of our work in that space, we do this series within Skills Jam called Skills Jam Goes to Work, right? Showing young students, hey, I'm a carpenter, but what can carpentry lead me to? And showing them what's possible.
Well, and to jump in on that, one of the things that I did when I went to Chicago in October of 23, when I was part of AHR Workforce Development with the Chicago Prosser Career Academy in high school, was, I went in to talk about HVAC, but I wanted to talk to those kids in that program about it a little bit different so they could get a different perspective on what it really meant to get into the HVAC field. Mm-hmm. Because most of these programs for students, whether it's in a high school program or community college, they're trying to build you into a technician or an installer. Most cases, they're trying to build you into a technician, and they tell you that that's the best place you can go make money in HVAC. Yes, no, maybe wrong or different. Depends on where you are, what you do, who you work for. That's the truth of it. But the other thing is, I wanted to take a different approach to that and say, okay, well, you can go and do this for 2 years, and you're going to learn how to go out in the field and do things, and you're going to go to work for somebody, and you're going to be in the field, and you're going to get real world experience. But let's say 2 years from now, you just don't like that. You may love the trade, but you don't like crawling in attics or crawling under houses.
Right.
And I said, for an example, there was a young girl in the front row, and I said, well, what do you really like to do? It's like, what would you want to do? And she said, marketing. I said, well, great. I said, guess what? You know what HVAC people need? They need marketing people that are good at what they do, that understand the trade. I said, there are many, many more jobs attached to HVAC that if you have the knowledge and understanding of what it takes to do that skilled trade, it can translate into a completely different job. It can translate into the job that you love, just with a little bit different perspective. Because the problem is, it's not just that contractors and people in the field are needed. We also need people in distribution. We need people in manufacturers. We need people at manufacturers' reps. And if you can start there and have that understanding and knowledge of what the trade is, you may not have enjoyed your time in the field, but your time in the field can transition you into another segment of that industry, and you can support those people in the field, and you can understand what it was like to be the guy in the truck at 6 a.m. on a Friday morning, driving an hour and a half through shitty morning traffic to get to a job that you really didn't want to have to do, but you know you've got to do it right so you can go to the next one. So there's so much more to what you can do, that if you learn how to do something with your hands, it can turn into something else.
No, exactly. And I think, the probably the most important business skill or lesson I learned, I mean, there's others, but this is the one, which is try to say yes to every job opportunity you can, right? Even if it's something you're not good at or weren't trained to do, simply because it's best to know, like, if you want to run a business someday, and this is exactly my point about when I was leaving healthcare and moving into, snowboard and skateboard production, I never run a business. I had worked with people and helped people run businesses, but I'd never done it myself. And so that was my risk-taking, approach to saying, actually, I need to go learn how to do this if I'm going to be well-rounded. And I think that's your point too. Like, there's all kinds of jobs attached to a skilled career, skilled trade, that don't have to be, in the space of, crawling through, small spaces, as you said. There's a whole host of opportunities out there, but I think grounding you in having done the jobs of the people or your customers that you're trying to support is, even if you don't like it, but having done it, or at least have knowledge of it, is incredibly important to, rounding out and supporting that customer base.
I think you mentioned it some when we were talking earlier. Perspective is a very powerful tool, and it changes, quite literally, it changes your perspective and your understanding of what you can do with the knowledge you have. And going back to, talking about involvement of social media and trying to change perspective on things. I know you've worked with some big names like Plumber Page, Joanne Sprague, Ty Pennington. Move that bus. How is their involvement helped to bring additional visibility to skilled careers?
Well, I mean, it certainly helped, because I think in some ways, I'm a Gen Xer. I'm in my early 50s. I am certainly not going to be able to, and I'm not in the trades. I'm not in a skilled career. I am certainly not going to be the one that's actually going to engage a young student that's in CT programming, or a student that's interested in a skilled career. So we've got to be working with those individuals that, live in they're digitally native. This is where they spend their time. They didn't grow up in a period where social media didn't exist in their life. So they're just digitally native and know how to use it for good. And, someone who's younger and can talk to, my 11-year-old son in a language that he understands. I think that's incredibly important, because it's certainly not going to be coming from, 50-plus-year-old me. But when you look at, our work with Ty, yes, we're trying to get to young students. Yes, we're trying to get them to consider a third option. But the reality is, some of the biggest advisors in that student's life is their parents and their advisors. When we look at someone like Ty Pennington and what Ty has done throughout his career, he's incredibly recognizable. Our first series with him last year at Skills Jam around Champions League, on the floor of Skills USA's National Leadership and Skills Conference and Championship, was him walking the floor, and every single parent knew who he was. And that was kind of our proof point to go, yep, this is who we should be, engaging with, because he's recognizable, and he has a voice to kind of talk to those parents about why this stuff is important. So it's not just the young students with Plumber Page It's also the parents and the advisors with someone like Ty, and making sure that we're balancing that. And part of our work with the two of them this coming year is showing that, generational, this great skills transfer that we're talking about is visually Ty and Paige talking about what Ty's learned, but also what Paige has learned, and sharing the knowledge between the two of them and showing them it's possible. Because at the end of the day, we need to be influencing a young audience to think about a skill career, and we need to be influencing their parents and advisors that a skill career is an option for their student or their child.
You mentioned Skills USA. I know you've worked with a bunch of organizations, Skills USA for one, ASCA, Harbor Freight, Angie's List. What's kind of been your most exciting partnership so far, and how have those names also helped bridge that gap from parent down to child, because they know the names of these major companies such as a Harbor Freight or an Angie's List?
Sure. Like my parents, I won't pick favorites. One of three boys, and that was always what they told us. We don't have favorites. So look, all of those partners bring different skills and opportunities and competencies and stuff that we're excited about working with them on. So, call out a few. Skills USA that we mentioned, they are the largest student run CTE organization in the US, right? They have about 440,000 active student members who are currently in career technical education in America. And that's a huge opportunity to engage them in that student base. It's also an opportunity for us to help them really get the word out about what amazing work that they're doing, and support them in ensuring that Skills USA continues to grow and continues to build that footprint within educating young individuals. The American School Council Association, another strategic partner of ours, the reason we're excited about working with them is the counselors have, 8 hours out of every single day with most of our kids and students where they can impact positively that student in a whole host of ways, right? Teachers and counselors are with your children for a third of the day, typically. And so how do we help support those counselors when they're having a conversation with the student, when it moves to a conversation about what they want to do when they grow up, right? And giving them the talking points and the tools to talk about skill careers alongside going to a 4-year degree or going into the military. So those two partnerships we're excited about for different reasons, right? We want to be hearing the work of the counselors and the teachers, and we want to be hearing the work of these young students and their journey through career technical education. When we talk about some of our business partners, they come at it from different angles. They want to look at this differently. Some are looking at it from a workforce development perspective, all the way through to some of them are really in this space of making sure that they're engaged in corporate social responsibility. And, anywhere from the work we're doing with Warner Brothers Discovery, if you go to our first season of Skills Jam on YouTube, you'll see us taking different type of skill careers and then bringing them to the Warner Brothers Discovery lot in Burbank, California, and showing, construction students that they have the opportunity to build sets for Harry Potter, as an example, or build sets or do video or post-production with Warner Brothers. Now, obviously, it helps Warner Brothers because they have all this below-the-line talent that they've got to attract to the business, but they're also trying to really, showcase that they're interested and concerned about how do we rebuild skilled careers in America? How do we rebuild the skilled trades workforce? So they want to be involved in that type of work where they can, feel like they're giving back from a corporate social responsibility perspective, but also from making sure they look at their own workforce and some of the challenges they see with hiring in that talent.
It's such an interesting thing that you bring up, set building. This is a bit of a hard left turn segue, but I have an older half brother who he made a great career as a set builder on Broadway in the 80s and 90s, and now he teaches that at a college in Louisiana. So that's another complete avenue that it takes a lot of those different learn with your hands, skilled trades things to do those things. But no one would think about a career like that in most cases unless they had been in drama class or a theatrical field. So I think bridging those kind of gaps is a really cool different way to just show how the trades are involved across different things.
Yeah. And another example, just to point in, like, Harbor Freight, right? Which, we work with them and they have this Tools for Schools program. The reality is a lot of these CTE programs or trade schools don't have access to equipment.
No, and they have no budget
They
whatsoever
have no budget
to get it.
whatsoever. So, Harbor Freight is reeling in a bunch of other manufacturers and retailers and wholesalers are in this space too, like really providing, the tools that are out there today to those young students and those schools, because schools are limited in their budget. So a lot of their programming around that is, hey, how do we make sure that, as someone is going through school and coming out of school, is leveraging the tools and the trades that are being used now. And for them, obviously, there's an upside because, if I'm using Harbor Freight tools or, other types of products in my day-to-day job, and I've always been using those tools since I was in, CTE school, then I'm probably going to be a Harbor Freight.
Yeah, your built-in customer base.
Exactly right.
What's your long-term vision look like right now for SCC? If you fast forward 5 years from now, 10 years from now, what is success in closing the labor gap really look for you and the team?
Yeah, there's a couple questions in that, I think. And I always talk about success and significance. Success is defined by things that we're doing to really build up the conversation. So let's just talk about Skills Jam. I don't think we have aspirations for Skills Jam to be constantly growing and we become this massive, media production house. I don't think that's why we're here. That's not our intent and that's not our core competency. But we need to have enough of a volume and enough of conversation to make a difference and a dent, right?
Yep.
Where I see the value and ultimately the significance of what we're doing, which is very different. And if I think about that, we've got a skilled trades gap, depending on who you ask, of anywhere from 5 to 8 million. I'm just going to go with 6 because that feels about the midpoint. So if we've got an unfilled skilled trades gap of 6 million jobs today, our significance is working with others through the coalition to close that gap. And we'll never get it to zero because things change. We're seeing what's happening with AI right now and the disruption it's creating in different markets and different jobs. But the reality is we can do a lot of work to go from 6 million to say, let's, get to less than 1 million in the next 5 to 10 years. And I think that's all doable. So that's the significance of where are we trying to go, begin with the end in mind. What are we trying to solve for? And that's that gap number, right? All the way upstream, when we talk about success is, hey, how do we build a big enough platform that we feel comfortable that our message is out there and being seen alongside others? Because those two things, if you look at it from a very simplistic view, right, the significance, closing the gap, those 6 million jobs, that's a demand issue. If you look at it from the Inspire space and having Skills Jam at a level that, it's content that's being fed alongside some of our partners. We're all messaging the same thing. That's addressing the supply end of the issue. So how do we work on those two things? One is, hey, we're successful in, building a brand that is actually being seen quite a bit, and we're addressing the supply issue. But the ultimate end of the day is that demand has to be met, right? We have to fill that gap at a level that it's significant enough that we've done our job.
As we move forward into that, let's talk a bit more about if you could bring back shop class in every high school tomorrow to help start letting kids see this as an option again, what does that look like? And what would be, one piece of advice that you would want a counselor or a teacher, to give a high schooler today?
Well, I think if I were to walk onto a campus today, whether it's a trade school specific campus or a mixed campus, I think there's been a huge gutting of providing trade type skills and training on existing school campuses. And I think there needs to be a reinvestment in that, right? I also, that extends to, in my thinking and our thinking of, if you look at public universities or even private universities, but mostly public universities, in my neck of the woods, the UC system here in California, the change in perception about 4-year degrees and skilled careers and other opportunities for young individuals is going to move where people are spending their time, right? So a lot of these 4-year universities, particularly the public ones, have huge infrastructure. How do we redesign some of that infrastructure to support continuing technical education on a campus that was typically a 4-year degree campus. I think there's opportunities in that to think about how do we redesign and, really start investing at the right level in trade schools on existing campuses, in trade programs within existing public schools, and then also on, university campuses, particularly public ones, investing in continuing education around trades. That opportunity is there, but that requires funding and budget. But when you go to some of these trade schools, as I have, you can tell the difference in the level of funding, right? Those tools that they're using are, antiquated, right? They don't work as well. And so we've got to be thinking about how do we invest and where do we put those opportunities out in the hands of the students.
Again, I know I brought it up before, but when I walked into the classroom in Chicago 2 years ago, the newest piece of equipment that these kids are learning on was from the early 90s.
Correct.
Everything in that lab was R22, which we've not been using for quite some time.
Correct.
Not that it's not still out there in places, but that's not going to teach them to be ready for what they're going to see even if they go to a technical college after this, it's not going to have them ready for what they're going to see. Now, more than likely, that tech school may be almost as antiquated, but hopefully would be a little bit in better shape. But it's the majority of trade schools I've walked into, just like you said, you can tell real quick that the funding was not put into that department at all.
Yeah. It's a disservice. I mean, we all look. Let's call it what it is. We've all worked into work environments that have probably been more difficult than just dealing with how you felt when you walked in than actually doing the job. And I think we've got to provide environments for these young students where they feel inspired to go to school every day and learn the trade and work on the latest equipment. I think there's a huge opportunity in that and reinvesting in just the physical plant of technical education in America.
You also talked about AI and new technologies are continuing to change every industry right now. How do you see that impacting the skilled trades? I don't think it's going to impact skilled trades quite as much as it has other industries, but there's still going to be, blowback from that. And where do you believe, SCC can help teach people to get around that coming new technology and it roadblocking things?
Yeah, and I think it will. I don't think it'll be as direct. And I mean, the conversation out there today is that it's going to impact more traditional office-based white-collar jobs, in the legal profession or accounting profession, et cetera, or coding and computer science, which I think it will. But the reality is it's going to impact just the economy in general and jobs overall. To what level? Open question. Because we're just on the eve of this thing kicking off. What I will say, just from experience in what's happening in mechatronics, as an example. So mechatronics, just for those that don't know, is anyone who's kind of managing, the inner workings or outer workings of automation, and how do you program automated devices or robots that are building cars or delivering packages. So mechatronics is a pretty broad brushstroke for this space where you're involved in manufacturing, but it's not like what you would envision 40 years ago on the auto plant work for. The interesting in that space and what we're seeing, because we were just in Chicago at one of our partners' conferences, Materials Handling Institute, and just seeing what's coming. And the reality is, in the old world, and MHI represents a whole bunch of folks in the space around any package that's touched, shipped, or moved in America. And one of the things that we found really interesting is, while those pick and pack type jobs in a warehouse, right, the people putting the t-shirt in the box to be sent out via Amazon,
Yep.
Those jobs aren't going to exist. In fact, in a lot of ways, those are the jobs that are being automated out. But the reality is, in order to manage that automation, those robots, those humanoids that are going to be doing the pick and pack type jobs. I used to do pick and pack when I was at the snowboard company. I know what it was like. Those jobs might be disappearing because of innovation or automation or the rise of AI, but the people who have to service that floor and those humanoids and those automated devices, those people are going to become highly skilled.
Yes.
And those are the types of students that we see starting to come out of programs. And when you talk to employers in that space, that's who they're looking for. And these are highly skilled jobs. These are not, what we would consider what it was like to be on a floor 40 years ago doing fabrication or manufacturing. They're much different. And so I do see some influence and impact from AI in the space. I think skilled careers are a bit more insulated from it currently. But even with the advent of automation and AI and moving into humanoids, like there's still tons of jobs, but they're highly skilled jobs.
I've seen that from, the very first time I did a factory tour, which was in 2011. I went to a manufacturer in the Midwest. And then a few years later, I went back to the same manufacturer. And in those few years, they had changed all sorts of things and added additional automation. But there were still people that have to control the automation machines. And then I have a friend that she works in automotive automation, and she works for Toyota, and she manages robotics that help build and manufacture pieces on cars. I'm seeing more and more of that every time I go on a manufacturing tour. There's more things that have been automated but have to be controlled by a human to make sure it stays within parameters or stays within spec, because there's always going to be that little bit of give and take. So it's constantly going to have to be adjusted, maintained, or maintenanced. So as you said, some of those jobs will disappear, but they're going to create other jobs that may not have been there before. And there's got to be a way to manage that.
Exactly right. I mean, if you were, driving a horse buggy taxi in New York in the 1880s and you saw cars coming along, right? Those jobs disappeared and those changed. You became a taxi driver. Now you have Uber and Lyft, which is changing the industry again.
Yep.
The reality is that the jobs do change because of disruption, but ultimately new jobs pop up. I think the challenge that I see with CTE education, and I see with education in general, is like, how do you re-job people in the workforce as those disruptive pieces of technology or otherwise are coming into the market, and how quickly it's moving now, I think is a real challenge. Is AI is going to move pretty quickly. How do we make sure that we're finding those jobs that are most likely going to disappear or be different in kind, and the workforce that can be applied against that, and retraining them in the new environment?
What's up, trade crew? Are you tired of playing microfarad hide and seek with your service truck inventory? I think it's time that you tested out the Turbo 200 family from Amrad Manufacturing and Global to Source, where efficiency meets durability and finding the right capacitor is never a game of chance. With the Turbo family of universal capacitors, you're not just getting any regular capacitor. No. You're getting the HVAC industry's version of a superhero cape. Reliable, efficient, ready to save the day, these ruggedly tested, made in the USA capacitors are prepared for whatever you run into during your service calls. These truly unique and industry-changing universal capacitors allow you to replace over 200 individual sizes with just their 4 models: the Turbo 200, Turbo 200X, Turbo Mini, and Turbo Mini Oval. And did I mention they have a 5-year warranty? Seriously, what are you waiting for? Do the math and upgrade your truck stock setup today, because the Turbo family has got you covered. Visit the HVAC R&D Vendor Hub and click on the Global to Source link to request training from a local account executive in your market. Easy peasy. Amrad Manufacturing, where performance meets perfection. Because in the world of HVAC, good enough isn't in our vocabulary. It's turbo or nothing. And now, back to the show. No, I completely agree with all those things, and we've covered a whole lot of really interesting and in-depth topics. This has been a really fun conversation. I wanted to start to close this with a couple of other questions, and a little bit shifting gears, but at the same time not. You've spent years working to make a difference in mental health. Ironically, the very first partnership that I ever was able to set up for this show 5 years ago was actually with BetterHelp, and I talked a lot about mental health in the trades and
sure, yeah.
over time. And I think it's been a huge talking point for people that are currently in the trades or have been for the last 20 years, but I think it's going to be an even more important topic for the next generations that are coming into the trades and the skilled careers. What's one way as a trades community as a whole that we can support and uplift this next generation that's coming up with mental health and the challenges of different things and struggles that we've faced, and help them to be able to cope with some of these rapid changes that we've seen, but we've never had to deal with the change at the pace this next group of people will?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's a multifaceted question, and I'll try to keep it succinct in my answer because I have thought about this quite a bit. I'll just use the anecdote that you don't leave your home to go to your job and not have what happened at home impact you showing up at work. You don't leave work to go home to your family and not have what happened at work doesn't impact your evening with your family, right? So mental health doesn't stop and start at the door of going to work or coming home from work. It's across time. And so how you are showing up as an employee, how you are showing up for your employees as an employer is incredibly important, but also understanding what people are bringing to work with them. What might be happening at home, and just understanding that you don't turn things on or off, right? When you go from one place to the next, your environments may change, but how you are interacting with those environments, you have a good day, you have a bad day, those are going to impact what's happening in your home environment or your work environment. So I think it's just understanding how people move through their day. And look, I've run businesses and I've had to think about this in terms of my employees' well-being, making sure that when they showed up, if they were in a space that they were coming from home or whatever, or they had a hard morning, that they had the space to go kind of find a way, or quite frankly, if they weren't able to, show up for work that day, take the time. I think we have to think differently about that. And, my watch out for employers, often, there's this generational pushback as to, when I'm a Gen Xer, I was called a slacker when I was growing up. But the reality is that, mental health has always been there, and it sounds like you've been having conversations with a lot of folks. I know there's a conversation happening in skilled careers and other parts of, when I look at it from a men's health lens. The reality is you've got these environments that are impacting you and how your employee shows up or how you show up at home as a parent. And you also have this generational change in trying to understand who your employees are going to be. And, I think, there's always this disconnect between one generation and another. Gen X's were always slackers. We were latchkey kids. But the reality was, if I wanted to be a really good employer and, produce something great in the world and, be competitive and run a business, I kind of need to know who's coming up. So yeah. I think one of the things that's interesting in the work, and I would implore, people who are a bit older and, in the hiring space for HVAC or, another skilled career or skilled trade type job, is understand when we're, producing content around Skills Jam, like that's how students are talking now. That's how your next employees are going to show up and look like. The one thing I would say to young students who are in those trades, one of the things we hear from the employers is soft skills. Soft skills, right? You can teach someone to swing a hammer. You can teach someone to, fix an HVAC system. But if your soft skills aren't there, you aren't able to look someone in the eye, you're not reliable and show up on time for work, you're not going to be employable for very long. So we've got to get this balance right between understanding the generation that's coming up and how do we meet them where they're at, but also the younger generation understanding, that soft skills are incredibly important to being an employee or, as you said, like your dad did, standing up a business. You don't last very long in standing up your own business as an entrepreneur if you're not reliable. So you've got to create that balance between those two. And I think that's my advice to employees and employers when you're thinking about this. How do you show up is important. And then recognizing that people come to work from different environments and their mental health is equally as important as their physical health.
Last question, and we'll leave it at that. If you had to pick one trade to master yourself, which one would it be and why?
That's a great question. Yeah, I think I've always had this challenge. My dad was a surgeon, but he loved to fix cars. And, very early on when I was young, when cars were a lot simpler, I would watch him fix cars, and obviously hand him the wrench every once in a while. But I think I would love to know how to sort of manage and maintain and fix my own car. So, I don't know if that's an auto mechanic. I probably would be very terrible at body work because I'm a bad painter in general. But I think just being an auto mechanic and, knowing how to fix my own car and maintain it, I think that would be really cool.
talking about things have changed. It is not the same working on your car that it used to be.
I know.
To be a mechanic these days, it's no longer you're rebuilding it with your buddy over the weekend and dropping it back in for Monday. Now it's you got to hook a computer to it so it can help tell you what's going on with it. It's totally different.
Well, that's why I might go back to like a 1977 Bronco, just so I can kind of live in the space where my dad and I were trying to fix it. So, but I totally agree. Every time I open up the hood of my car, I'm like, I have no idea what's happening.
Now, is California going to let you do that?
I
don't know how long. You might have to put a battery in it. That you may have to be a completely different kind of mechanic in the next 10 years.
We'll see. I mean, I'm just still trying to find the oil dipstick in the car.
Well, Mark, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for speaking with me and with the trade crew. I'll shout out where listeners can connect with Skilled Trades on social media. So if you get on LinkedIn, it is there as the Skilled Trades Coalition, on Instagram at Skills Jam, on YouTube and TikTok at The Skills Jam. If you're not following HVAC R&D online, you can find me on Instagram and TikTok at hvac.rnd, and you can find me on LinkedIn, TradeHounds, and Facebook as the HVAC R&D Podcast. Please make sure to also follow the newest R&D bonus show, the HVAC Zoomies, on Instagram at HVAC Zoomies, where we talk about HVAC news real quick, so we can talk about Formula One and cars that go real quick with a fellow tradie from up in Canada. Thank you for listening to the show on your favorite platform, whatever it may be. Please smash the like and subscribe button to follow the show. Please like and rate the show. Leave me a review. Leave me a comment. I will respond to you. Please share the show with your trade crew. Go and check out HVACRnd.com. Visit the vendor hub and the swag shop. If you want to work with me or join the show, click the link in the podcast questionnaire in the episode description or on social media. Everybody have a great week, and I'll catch you soon. Peace.